There's a moment you may not remember exactly when someone looked at you and understood, faster than you understood yourself, exactly which lever to pull. Maybe it was a partner who knew that silence would make you chase them. Maybe it was a boss who knew that guilt would make you stay late, work harder, ask for less. Maybe it was a friend who knew that a certain look held a second too long would make you apologize for something you never did wrong. You felt it happen. You felt yourself bend. And the worst part wasn't the bending. It was not knowing in the moment that you were being played like an instrument someone else had learned to read. This is what it means to be legible, to be a book someone else has already finished reading, while you're still on the first page of understanding yourself. Manipulators do not need to be intelligent. They do not need to be cunning in some cinematic, mustache-twirling way. They only need one thing, to know your patterns better than you do. And most people never study their own patterns. They live inside their reactions the way a fish lives inside water, unaware it's even there, unaware there could be anything else. Machiavelli did not write The Prince to teach cruelty. That is the shallow reading, the one that lets people dismiss him and therefore never absorb what he actually understood. He wrote it because he had watched, up close, in the bloody theater of Renaissance Italy, exactly how power moves when no one is being sentimental about it. He watched idealists get devoured by realists. He watched good men lose everything because they refused to see the board for what it was. And from that wreckage, he extracted a single, uncomfortable truth. The world is not run by the virtuous. It is run by the perceptive. To become impossible to manipulate is not to become cold. It is not to become someone who trusts no one, loves no one, opens up to no one. That is not strength. That is just a different kind of prison, one you build for yourself out of fear dressed up as wisdom. No, to become impossible to manipulate is to become someone who sees the mechanism clearly enough that it simply stops working on you. The lever gets pulled. Nothing moves. Not because you're hardened, but because you finally understand what you're made of. Here is the part almost no one tells you. Manipulation does not exploit your weakness. It exploits your unexamined strengths. Your loyalty twisted into obligation. Your empathy twisted into guilt. Your ambition twisted into desperation. Your love twisted into leverage. The very qualities that make you good are the same qualities someone else can turn into a leash if you never take the time to understand exactly how they work inside you. So this is not a video about becoming ruthless. This is a video about becoming awake, about taking Machiavelli's cold, unflinching clarity about power and turning it inward first before you ever turn it outward. Because you cannot protect a self you have never mapped. You cannot defend territory you don't know the borders of. And right now, somewhere in your life, someone knows your borders better than you do. That ends today, not with anger, not with paranoia, with precision. Because the moment you understand exactly how you can be moved is the exact moment you become unmovable. Let's talk about the first tool in the manipulator's kit, because you need to see it named before you can see it coming. It's called incrementalism. No one asks you to hand over your whole self on day one. That would trigger alarms even in the most trusting person alive. Instead, they ask for something small, a minor compromise, a tiny boundary shaved off, so gently you barely feel the blade. And when you give it, nothing bad happens, so your guard lowers just slightly. Then they ask for a little more, and a little more, each request calibrated to be just below the threshold that would make you push back. This is how people end up in relationships, jobs, and friendships that cost them everything, wondering how they got there when the truth is they were walked there one imperceptible step at a time. Machiavelli understood this instinctively, though he wrote about armies and territories instead of hearts and boundaries. He knew that a fortress rarely falls to a single, overwhelming siege. It falls because someone somewhere, left a gate unguarded for just one night, certain that one night wouldn't matter. The prince who survives, he argued, is the one who treats every gate as if it matters, not out of paranoia, but out of respect for how power actually moves. Quietly, patiently, through cracks, not walls. So here is your first shift in perception. Stop asking, is this request unreasonable? And start asking, what pattern is this request part of? A single ask in isolation will almost always look small enough to grant. That's the design. The manipulation isn't in the ask, it's in the sequence. You have to zoom out from the moment to see the shape of what's being built around you. The second tool is even more insidious because it wears the mask of intimacy, strategic vulnerability. This is when someone shares something raw, something that feels like trust, early in a relationship before trust has actually been earned through time. It disarms you instantly. Your empathy floods in. You feel chosen, special, like you've been led into a room no one else has seen. And once that door opens, you stop checking their behavior against their words because you've decided emotionally that you already know who they are. But real vulnerability is revealed slowly, tested against consistency. Weaponized vulnerability is deployed fast, and it's designed to buy your trust at a discount, trust that was never actually earned, only borrowed against your own good faith. Notice the difference now, because it will save you years. Someone who is genuinely safe does not need you to feel sorry for them, to feel close to you. Someone who is manipulating you does. Watch not for what someone shares, but for what that sharing costs you in judgment. Does it make you more clear-eyed about them, or less? Real intimacy sharpens your perception of another person. Manufactured intimacy blurs it on purpose. Here is what Machiavelli would tell you, stripped of all the moral commentary history piled onto him. The people who survive are not the ones who assume good faith. They're the ones who verify it, calmly, continuously, without ever announcing that they're doing so. Not cynicism, vigilance. There is a difference, and the difference is everything, because cynicism closes you off from the world, while vigilance simply means you finally open your eyes while staying open-hearted. You're not paranoid for noticing patterns. You're simply done being the last person in the room to see the shape of what's happening to you. Now we need to talk about the moment right before manipulation works, because there's always a moment, a hinge point, where you could have stopped it and didn't. That moment has a name, the emotional flood. It's the instant your nervous system gets hijacked by a feeling so strong that your thinking brain simply goes offline. Fear does it. Guilt does it. Sudden flattery does it too. The ego, flooded with unexpected praise, drops its guard just as fast as the ego flooded with unexpected shame. Manipulators don't need to out-argue you. They just need to out-flood you, because a flooded mind cannot evaluate. It can only react. This is why the most dangerous conversations you'll ever have are not the calm ones. They're the fast ones. The ones where someone raises their voice, or cries, or drops a bombshell, and suddenly you're agreeing to something you would have rejected outright with 5 minutes to think. Speed is not an accident in these moments. Speed is the strategy. Confusion is not a side effect. Confusion is the objective, because a confused person reaches for the nearest exit, and the manipulator has made sure they're standing right next to it. Machiavelli wrote something that sounds cold on the surface, but is actually a form of self-defense once you understand it. He said a wise ruler cannot always keep their word, because circumstances change and men are not always good to you. People read that as license for cruelty. It isn't. It's a warning about pace. He is telling you, do not commit yourself irreversibly in the heat of a moment someone else has engineered. Slow down before you promise. Slow down before you sign. Slow down before you say the words that can't be unsaid. So here is your second shift. When you feel the flood rising, that hot, urgent, now pressure, that is precisely the moment to say the 4 words that dismantle almost every manipulation tactic ever invented. Let me think about it. Watch what happens next. A person with good intentions will accept this instantly because they were never afraid of your clear thinking to begin with. A person who was manipulating you will push back hard because delay is the one thing their strategy cannot survive. The reaction to your pause tells you everything the words never will. This is not about becoming someone who overthinks every interaction into paralysis. It's the opposite. It's about protecting the 2 or 3 moments per year where the stakes are actually high enough to matter. The job offer, the relationship ultimatum, the family guilt trip, the business deal wrapped in urgency. In those moments, time is not your enemy. Time is the one resource a manipulator cannot fabricate more of. Every tactic they have is calibrated to work fast, in the narrow window before your rational mind catches up to your flooded emotions. Take that window away, and you take away almost all of their leverage in a single move. Machiavelli did not survive the brutal politics of Florence by being the most trusting man in the room. He survived by being the most observant. And observation, real observation, requires exactly one thing that panic destroys: time. Give yourself the time. Not out of fear, out of respect for how much your future self is worth. There's a question you need to start asking about everyone close to you, not out of suspicion, but out of self-respect. Do they treat my no as information or as an obstacle? This single distinction will tell you more about a person's character than 100 conversations ever could. A safe person, when you decline something, adjusts. They might be disappointed, but they respect the boundary as real. A manipulative person, when you decline something, doesn't hear no, they hear not yet, and they immediately begin searching for the angle that will change your answer. Watch what happens after you refuse someone. That's where the truth lives, not in what they say before. This connects to something Machiavelli understood about power that most people miss entirely. He never believed that people are simply good or simply evil. He believed people behave according to what their environment rewards. Give someone a world where manipulation works, where boundaries dissolve under enough pressure, and you will teach them, through repeated success, to keep manipulating not because they're a cartoon villain, but because you've accidentally trained them like you'd train any creature that learns for consequences. This is uncomfortable to hear, but it's also liberating because it means the pattern is not fixed. It means you hold more power over what gets rewarded in your relationships than you've been told. Here's the mechanism in practice. Someone pushes past your first no. You hold firm, but you feel guilty, so your tone softens, your explanation gets longer, you start justifying instead of simply declining. To them, this doesn't look like a boundary. It looks like a door that's almost open, just needs one more push. And the push comes. This is not because they're master strategists. It's because you unknowingly rewarded persistence the last 5 times it happened. And now persistence is the only strategy they need. So the shift here is not about becoming harsher. It's about becoming consistent. A boundary that holds the exact same shape whether you're calm or exhausted, whether you're alone or being watched, whether the person pushing is a stranger or someone you love. That is the boundary that eventually stops getting tested at all, because it stops being profitable to test. Manipulators, like anyone running on cost-benefit calculation whether they realize it or not, redirect their energy toward whoever's boundaries are still negotiable. Become expensive to push, and you become uninteresting to push. This is also where compassion and self-protection stop being opposites, something people in this space rarely explain well. You do not need to hate someone to hold a boundary against them. You do not need to villainize a person to simply stop absorbing the cost of their patterns. Machiavelli's cold clarity is useful here precisely because it strips away the guilt-laced mythology that says protecting yourself makes you cruel. It doesn't. It makes you sustainable. A castle with no walls isn't more loving than a castle with walls. It's just a castle that will eventually belong to someone else. You are allowed to be warm and fortified at the same time. You are allowed to love people fully while still refusing to be a resource they extract from. That isn't a contradiction. That's what emotional maturity actually looks like once you strip away the fantasy that good people don't need boundaries. Because in reality, the people who need boundaries the most are exactly the ones with enough heart for someone to want to take advantage of it. Let's go deeper into the architecture of trust, because there's a version of it that will get you hurt and a version of it that will make you nearly impossible to manipulate, and most people were never taught the difference. The version that gets you hurt is what we might call blanket trust. You decide, often early and often emotionally, that a person is good, and from that point forward, you interpret almost everything they do through that lens. Their inconsistencies get explained away. Their red flags get reframed as bad days. You're not being naive, exactly, you're being loyal to a conclusion you reached before the evidence was in. The version that protects you is what we might call earned, updating trust. This is trust as a live process, not a fixed verdict. You extend it in proportion to demonstrated behavior over time. And this is the crucial part, you keep updating it as new information arrives. Even when that new information is inconvenient. Even when it contradicts a story about someone you've already fallen in love with, whether that's a partner, a mentor, a friend, or a boss. This is not cynicism. Cynicism assumes the worst by default. Earned trust simply refuses to assume anything by default. It watches, and it lets the pattern speak. Machiavelli's entire political philosophy rests on a version of this same idea applied to statecraft. Alliances are not moral bonds. They're current alignments of interest, and a wise ruler tracks whether those interests are still aligned rather than assuming yesterday's ally is automatically tomorrow's ally. This sounds harsh applied to friendship or love, and people recoil from it for that reason. But strip away the cynicism, and what's left is simply honest maintenance. Relationships are not static monuments you build once and trust forever. They're living systems that require continuous, honest recalibration. The people who get blindsided by betrayal are very often the people who stopped updating years before the betrayal actually happened. Here's the practical shift. Start treating trust like a subscription, not a lifetime purchase. It renews based on consistent behavior. It doesn't renew automatically just because it renewed last year, last month, or even yesterday. This isn't about becoming suspicious of everyone in your life. It's about staying awake inside relationships you might otherwise sleepwalk through, coasting on the momentum of how things used to be rather than how they actually are right now. And here's the part that will change how you see every manipulator you've ever encountered. They're almost always counting on your blanket trust, not your earned trust. They're counting on the fact that once you've decided someone is one of the good ones, you'll do their evaluative work for them, filling in gaps with generosity, explaining away contradictions, defending them even to people who are trying to warn you. This is why the people closest to you are sometimes the hardest to see clearly. Proximity doesn't just build intimacy. Left unchecked, it also builds blind spots, and manipulators, whether consciously strategic or simply patterned from a lifetime of getting away with it, learn to live inside exactly those blind spots. Becoming impossible to manipulate does not mean trusting less. It means trusting more precisely. It means letting your trust be earned continuously by everyone, including the people who've already earned quite a lot of it, especially them. Because the stakes of getting it wrong only grow as the intimacy grows, and the moment you stop checking is exactly the moment someone learns they no longer need to be checked. There's a darker layer to manipulation that almost nobody talks about, because it doesn't come from strangers or enemies, it comes disguised as concern. This is what we might call weaponized care. It sounds like, I'm only telling you this because I love you. It sounds like, I just don't want to see you get hurt. It sounds like the language of protection, deployed in service of control. And because it borrows the vocabulary of love, it's nearly impossible to argue against without sounding ungrateful, defensive, or cold, which is precisely why it's such an effective tool in the hands of someone who wants to shrink your world without ever appearing to be the villain of the story. Watch for this pattern specifically. Does their concern consistently, almost coincidentally, steer you away from other relationships, other opportunities, other sources of confidence that don't run through them? Does their worry for you always seem to shrink your world rather than expand it? Real love wants you bigger. It wants you more resourced, more connected, more capable of standing without them if it ever came to that. Weaponized care wants you smaller, because a smaller world is a world with fewer alternatives, and fewer alternatives means less leverage for you and more leverage for them. Machiavelli wrote extensively about isolation as a political strategy, though he called it something else. He called it removing a rival's allies before making your move. A prince who wanted to conquer a territory rarely attacked the strongest point first. He identified who the local population trusted, and he found ways to sever those bonds quietly, so that by the time resistance was needed, there was no one left to organize it. This is not just a strategy of armies. It is uncomfortably the exact same mechanism that plays out in controlling relationships, toxic workplaces, and manipulative friend groups. Isolate the target from outside perspective, and the target's only remaining source of truth about the situation becomes the manipulator themselves. This is why the people you should hold on to most tightly are not the ones who make you feel the most comfortable. They're the ones who still have access to you when things get difficult. If you notice your world quietly shrinking, if you notice fewer people know what's actually going on in your life, if you notice you've started pre-justifying your relationships to friends who used to just accept them, that is not paranoia. That is data. That is your own perception trying to hand you a warning your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. Protect your outside perspective the way you'd protect anything else essential to your survival. Because in a very real sense, it is essential to your survival, your psychological survival, your sense of self, your ability to tell the difference between what's actually happening and what you've been told is happening. Keep people in your life who knew you before the relationship, before the job, before the dynamic that's currently shaping your days. Not because you assumed the worst of anyone, but because outside perspective is the single hardest thing for manipulation to survive. It cannot operate in daylight, in front of witnesses, under the scrutiny of people who remember who you were before. Machiavelli never trusted a prince who ruled through isolation alone, because isolated power is fragile power. It only looks strong until the moment it's tested. The same is true of you. Stay witnessed. Stay connected, not out of fear of the people close to you, but out of respect for how much clearer you see when you're not seeing alone. Now let's talk about the single most underrated skill in this entire framework, because it's not glamorous, it doesn't sound powerful, but might be the closest thing to armor that actually exists: the ability to sit in discomfort without needing to resolve it immediately. Manipulation, at its core, is an attack on your tolerance for ambiguity. It creates a tense, uncomfortable feeling and then offers you exactly one fast way to make that feeling go away: compliance. Agree, apologize, give in, explain yourself, hand over the thing being asked for, and the discomfort lifts instantly. This is not an accident. This is the entire mechanism. Discomfort in, relief promised in exchange for one specific action out. The person who can tolerate discomfort without rushing to resolve it becomes almost unmanipulable, because the entire transaction depends on your urgency to escape a bad feeling. Take away the urgency, and you take away the leverage. This is not about becoming numb or emotionally detached, quite the opposite. It's about becoming someone who can feel tension fully, name it accurately, and still choose their next move deliberately rather than reactively. Tension is just information. It is not, on its own, and instruction. Machiavelli understood something about this that gets lost in modern readings of his work. He was not advocating for coldness as a personality trait. He was advocating for what we now call emotional regulation under pressure. The capacity to feel the full weight of a threatening situation and still think clearly inside it, rather than being swept along by the nearest available reaction. The princes who lost their territories, in his analysis, were rarely the ones who felt too little. They were the ones who let feeling override judgment at exactly the moment judgment mattered most. Here is a practical distinction worth carrying with you. There's a difference between urgency and importance. Manipulation almost always manufactures urgency, because urgency short-circuits your evaluation process. It makes right now feel like the only acceptable timeline. But genuine importance rarely requires an immediate answer. The people and situations that actually matter most in your life can almost always survive you taking a breath, taking a walk, sleeping on it, asking someone else's opinion. If a situation cannot survive you pausing for even a moment, that itself is information about the situation, not about you. This is where you start to build what we might call psychological ballast. The internal weight that keeps you upright even when someone is actively trying to tip you over. Ballast isn't built in the moment of crisis. It's built in the quiet, unremarkable moments before crisis ever arrives. The moments you spend actually knowing your own values, actually understanding your own patterns, actually practicing the pause instead of just intending to use it someday when it matters. By the time manipulation shows up at your door, it is too late to start building the foundation that would have kept you standing. So build it now, not out of fear of what's coming, but out of respect for the fact that something eventually will. Every person who has ever mastered the art of not being moved by other people's urgency did so through the same unglamorous practice: pause, breathe, evaluate, and only then decide. It's not exciting. It doesn't make for dramatic footage, but it is quietly one of the most powerful things a human being can do for themselves. Let's bring this all the way home, because everything we've walked through so far, the incrementalism, the flooding, the weaponized care, the erosion of your outside perspective, it all points toward one final truth. And it's the truth Machiavelli built his entire philosophy around. Power is not something you seize once and keep forever. It is something you maintain, moment by moment, through clear sight and deliberate action. The same is true of your own psychological sovereignty. Becoming impossible to manipulate isn't a destination you arrive at and then relax into. It's a practice, a daily act of staying awake inside your own life instead of sleepwalking through it on someone else's terms. Here is what changes once you actually absorb everything we've covered. You stop asking, how do I spot a manipulator, as though it's a single dramatic unveiling, a villain removing a mask. Real manipulation rarely announces itself that clearly. Instead, you start asking a quieter, more useful question. Where in my life have I stopped checking? Where have you stopped updating your trust? Where have you let urgency replace evaluation? Where has your world quietly gotten smaller without you noticing who benefited from that shrinking? These are not comfortable questions. But comfort was never the price of clarity. Clarity has always cost something, and it is always, without exception, worth what it costs. Machiavelli was not popular in his own time for telling these truths, and he isn't always popular now, because people want to believe the world runs on good intentions alone. It doesn't. It runs on incentives, patterns, and perception, and the people who understand this are not doomed to become cold or ruthless because of it. They're simply no longer available to be moved by people who understand these mechanics better than they do. That's the entire game. Not becoming a manipulator yourself. Becoming someone the old tricks simply stop working on, because you finally see the strings before anyone can pull them. You do not need to distrust the world to protect yourself in it. You do not need to become hard, guarded, or closed off to stop being an easy target. What you need is precision. The ability to tell the difference between genuine intimacy and manufactured intimacy, between real concern and weaponized care, between a boundary being respected and a boundary being slowly, patiently dismantled. That precision is available to you right now. Not someday, not after you've been hurt enough times to earn it the hard way, but right now, simply by choosing to look clearly at what's actually in front of you instead of what you've been told is there. The people who move through this world the most freely are not the ones who trust everyone. And they're not the ones who trust no one either. They're the ones who trust precisely, who extend warmth generously while keeping their eyes open, who love fully while still noticing patterns, who stay soft-hearted without ever again being soft-headed about what's actually happening around them. That is not a contradiction. That is what mastery of this actually looks like. So carry this with you. The next time you feel that familiar pull, that flood of urgency, that quiet erosion of a boundary you know you set for a reason, pause. Not out of fear, out of respect for everything you've just learned about how these patterns work and how much power you actually hold once you finally see them clearly. You were never as easy to move as they thought. You were only ever waiting to notice. If this gave you a new lens on the people around you, if this hits something in you, don't scroll away from it. Subscribe, because the next video goes even deeper into the parts of Machiavelli's philosophy nobody else on this platform is willing to say out loud.